Okay, here is a lecture on Judith Jarvis Thomson's Defense of Abortion. And the reason I chose this one is because it's an analogical argument, plus it's a moral argument. So it kind of brings together, chapters 10 and 12 from Baronet. I actually need to give you a little bit of background to Thomson's argument. So when it comes to the abortion debate, you've got the pro-choicers and the pro-lifers. At least that's how they've been named, popularly. And so with the pro-lifers, they rely on the claim that the fetus is a human being and even a person. And they use this to show, or at least attempt to show, that abortion is morally impermissible. For something to be impermissible, it just means it's morally not okay. That you've done something wrong, right? If you've had an abortion, is the claim. Okay, so the fetus is a human being and a person. The central claim that we'll be thinking of here is person, right? Because pro-choicers they make a distinction between being human and being a person. They say it's not enough for you to be a person. It's not enough to be a person if you're just a human being. Not all human beings are persons. So, for example, the fetus in the early stages of its development, they would say, is not a person. Why? Because it doesn't have certain psychological capacities, like the ability to plan for the future or the ability to engage in high-level communication, right? So these are features of persons. The pro-lifers, they want to say, no, the fetus is a person from very early on. Why? Because they think that all human beings are persons. So it's enough that you're a member of the species Homo sapien that you qualify as a person, right? And so the pro-choicers actually have a tough time here because, infants, for example, don't qualify as persons, at least on their definition. The severely mentally disabled, those in a persistent vegetative state, they all don't qualify as persons. Maybe even people in a coma, and so if it's okay to kill the fetus, maybe it's okay to kill the infant or the severely mentally disabled or the person in a coma. And so they have to say something there about why it's okay to kill the fetus but not the infant, for example. Whereas the pro-lifer, they claim that the fetus is a person. And so all human beings are persons, whether you're mentally disabled, whether you have an IQ of 160, whether you're in a coma, you're a person. And so it's morally unambiguous. So what Thomson does, what I just gave you was a standard abortion debate between the pro-lifers and the pro-choicers, whether or not the fetus is a person. And Thomson, she kind of sidesteps this whole debate about whether the fetus is a person. She grants the claim by pro-lifers that the fetus is a human being and even a person and has the same moral status as an adult human person. She grants all of that. The fetus is a human being, the fetus is a person, the fetus has the same moral status as an adult human person. And even still, she argues that abortion is sometimes permissible. How does she do that, right? Well, she argues that some abortions are still permissible since the morality of abortion, it does not depend, so she says, on the nature of the fetus, whether it's a human being or a person or whatever, but the relationship the fetus has to its mother, right? So she says, given this unique relationship, even if the fetus is a person, it's still sometimes at least permissible to have an abortion. So to get our intuitions going, our moral intuitions, she gives a thought experiment. Very famous thought experiment, very interesting thought experiment. The violinist case. So you wake up in the morning and you find yourself in bed with a famous unconscious violinist. He has a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has found that you alone have the right blood type to help. They have therefore kidnapped you, and the violinist's circulatory system was plugged into yours. so that your kidneys can be used to extract poisons from his blood. The director of the hospital tells you, look, we're sorry the Society of Music Lovers did this to you. We never would have permitted it if we had known. But hey, still, they did it. And the violinist is now plugged into you. To unplug you would be to kill him. But it's only for 9 months. By then he will have recovered his ailment and you can safely unplug. Okay, so here's the deal. You were kidnapped. This was against your will. You wake up in a hospital bed. You find yourself attached to this violinist. Your circulatory system is attached to his circulatory system. This violinist's kidneys are failing, and if you unplug, he's going to die. But within 9 months, if you stay plugged in, he'll recover and he can go on his merry way, and so can you. And so if you just stay plugged in for 9 months, well then, you can save a life. Okay, so maybe you've seen the parallel here between the violinist case and cases of pregnancy, which is exactly what Thomson wants you to see. But before we get to that, we have to ask, is it permissible, morally okay, for you to unplug from the violinist? Is it morally okay for you to unplug from the violinist? To unplug, prior to 9 months, to unplug would be to kill him or to at least let him die. And what Thomson says is obviously it's okay for you to unplug. You're not required to give up that much, as much as you would have to give up to save this person in order to keep someone alive. And so when you unplug, you've done nothing wrong. But if you stay plugged in, hey, you've done something above and beyond, what's called in philosophy supererogatory. So Thomson thinks that you would not be obligated to remain hooked up to the violinist. What do you think of this case? Are you morally obligated to stay plugged in to the violinist? What do you think? So here's Thomson's argument. We'll get to it. Remember the form of analogical arguments. X and Y have characteristics A, B, C in common. X has characteristic K, therefore Y has characteristic K. So when we're trying to construct her argument, we need to ask what two things are being compared, or cases. What two things are cases? What characteristics do they have in common? And what characteristic does one case have that is being inferred in the other case? So when you're constructing the argument, answer these 3 questions, and that'll help you understand or formulate the premises and the conclusion of the argument. So go ahead and try that on your own, but here's what I came up with. What two things are being compared? Being plugged into the violinist is compared to being pregnant, or at least being pregnant due to rape or having an unwanted pregnancy or something like that. What characteristics do these cases have in common? Well, they both require a 9-month commitment. They both require a large sacrifice of your time and your health and those sorts of things. There's a dependency in both cases. In the one case, the violinist is dependent on you. In the other case, the fetus is dependent on you for its life. The use of the body, so the violinist uses your body, so does the fetus. And so these features are in common. And so what characteristic does one case have that is being inferred in the other case? That it's permissible to unplug. So what Thomson says is obviously it's permissible for you to unplug from the violinist. And then we infer that it's permissible to unplug in cases of pregnancy, or if you want to restrict it, cases of unwanted pregnancy. If you want to restrict it even further, cases of pregnancy due to rape. Okay, so you can formulate the premises and the conclusion based on this slide here. And here's the arguments that I came up with. Number 1, being hooked up to the violinist is analogous to having an unwanted pregnancy. 2, one is not morally required to remain hooked up to the violinist. Therefore, one is not morally required to carry a pregnancy to term, or a pregnancy due to rape to term, something like that. Okay, so Thomson thinks that you would not be obligated to remain hooked up to the violinist because the violinist doesn't have a moral right to your body. And so she says, similarly, a pregnant woman is not obligated to carry a fetus to term because the fetus does not have the moral right to the woman's body. So she says, here's the principle that she uses to kind of, draw those conclusions, that nobody is morally required, that is obligated, to make large sacrifices of health, of all other interests and concerns, of all other duties and commitments to keep another person alive. If that is true, then she thinks she can conclude that you don't have to stay hooked up to the violinist, or you don't have to stay pregnant. You can have an abortion. So we need to respond to Thomson. As always, when we give an argument, we want to consider objections to the argument. So compare the violinist case to cases of pregnancy. Can you see any relevant disanalogies, any differences between pregnancy and the violinist case that would make the inference sort of suspect, so that you can't necessarily infer that what's okay in one case is okay in the other case? Or can you think of any counter analogies? So she has this clever violinist case. She also has the expanding baby case. She has the people seeds case. If you're curious about those things, you can read her article. So can you come up with a counter analogy, an analogy that's closer to pregnancy than the violinist case? And for that counter analogy, it's clear that you can't kill a person or allow a person to die, and therefore, in the case of pregnancy, you can't have an abortion, right? So if you can think of a counter analogy that's better than her violinist case, and the counter analogy swings our intuitions in favor of saving a life rather than killing a life, well then, that undermines her violinist argument, and maybe even serves as an argument against abortion. And what consequences of Thomson's argument do you see that Thomson may not be willing to accept? Okay, that's it for this argument.